On the coldest morning ever recorded in Montana's history, Tom Wilson's peaceful winter routine was shattered by an unimaginable sight. The thermometer outside his kitchen window read a bone-chilling 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and the bitter wind howled through the mountain valley with merciless force. But it wasn't the record-breaking cold that made his coffee cup slip from his trembling hands. It was what he saw through the frost-covered living room window. A massive grizzly bear, her fur crystallized with ice, standing upright against the glass. Tom's first thought was fear. A grizzly so close to his home could only mean trouble. But then he noticed something unusual. The bear wasn't showing aggression or searching for food. Instead, she was knocking, deliberately tapping her massive paw in a rhythmic pattern that seemed purposeful. Behind her, 3 small cubs huddled together in the snow, their tiny bodies shaking violently in the brutal cold. One of the cubs collapsed, its fragile frame barely moving. The mother bear's reaction sent chills down Tom's spine that had nothing to do with the freezing temperature. She rushed to her fallen cub, gently lifted it in her powerful jaws, and returned to the window. With movements that seemed impossibly deliberate, she pressed the tiny cub against the glass, as if pleading for help. Tom stood frozen, disbelief etched across his face. He'd lived in Montana for decades and had never witnessed anything like this. Bears were supposed to be hibernating, not knocking on windows in the dead of winter. Whatever had driven this family from their den must have been catastrophic. The wind howled louder, and the temperature seemed to plummet even further. Ice crystals formed on the cub's fur with frightening speed. The mother bear's actions grew more frantic. She alternated between checking her cubs and returning to the window, her gestures increasingly human-like in their desperation. Finally, she did something that defied all logic. She sat back on her haunches, raised both paws in what could only be described as a prayer position, and locked her gaze on Tom. Her eyes were filled with an intelligence that seemed impossible for a wild animal. They held a desperate plea that Tom couldn't ignore. When the second cub stumbled and fell into the snow, her anguish was palpable. She gently gathered both fallen cubs close, trying to warm them, but her attention remained fixed on Tom, her actions begging him to intervene. Tom's mind raced. Bears were dangerous. Approaching them could be deadly. But this was no ordinary encounter. The mother bear was doing everything in her power to communicate, and her desperation was undeniable. The smallest cub's movements had nearly stopped, its tiny body succumbing to the lethal cold. Summoning courage he didn't know he possessed, Tom moved to his front door. The mother bear watched his every step, her eyes following him with an understanding that felt almost human. As he cracked the door open, the brutal cold rushed in, stealing his breath. But before he could act, the mother bear did something astonishing. She carefully picked up her weakest cub, approached the door with deliberate slowness, and gently placed the baby just inside the threshold. Then she backed away, bowing her head in what seemed like submission. Tom was stunned. This wasn't just extraordinary, it was something that would force scientists to rewrite everything they thought they knew about animal intelligence. Inside the warmth of the house, the nearly frozen cub began to stir. Tom quickly wrapped it in a blanket and placed it near the fireplace. When he looked back at the door, the mother bear was gesturing toward her remaining cubs. He opened the door wider. This time, she guided her cubs forward with gentle nudges. Each one paused before crossing the threshold, as though following some unspoken command. Finally, the mother bear herself approached. Before entering, she wiped her paws in the snow, as if showing respect for Tom's home. Her movements were careful, almost graceful, as she stepped inside. Once indoors, her behavior continued to astonish. She kept her cubs in a neat corner near the fireplace, making no attempt to explore or forage. When one cub wandered too close to a bookshelf, she redirected it with a soft sound, almost like a mother's whispered warning. Her awareness of the space and her efforts to minimize disruption were nothing short of remarkable. The scene grew even more surreal when Tom's cat, Whiskers, emerged from hiding. The room tensed, but instead of aggression, the mother bear gently pulled her cubs closer, emitting a low rumble that seemed to convey calm. The cubs watched the cat with curious but non-threatening eyes, their behavior mimicking their mother's restraint. Hours passed, and the cubs regained their strength. As they warmed up, Their actions continued to defy natural instincts. They remained calm, avoided touching anything, and followed their mother's cues with uncanny precision. When Tom cautiously offered a bowl of water, the cubs waited for their mother's permission before drinking, careful not to spill. As the storm began to subside, the mother bear prepared her family to leave. She orchestrated their departure with the same deliberate care she'd shown throughout their visit. Each cub wiped its paws on the doormat before stepping outside, following their mother in a perfectly straight line. Before leaving, the mother bear turned to Tom one last time. She raised her massive paw in a gesture that looked unmistakably like a wave. The cubs mimicked her, creating a farewell so surreal that Tom felt tears well in his eyes. As the bear family disappeared into the snowy forest, Tom stood in his doorway, overwhelmed. His home was undisturbed, save for a single paw print left in the snow outside. A silent testament to the most extraordinary encounter of his life. Want to discover more incredible stories that will leave you amazed? Subscribe now and join thousands of readers who receive our most captivating tales straight to their inbox. Click the subscribe button below to be a part of our journey of discovery